Hi, my name is Jen Salinetti. My husband Pete and I own Woven Roots Farm. We have been renting land in Lee, Massachusetts for the last 14 growing seasons. And over the last 2 years we have begun farming on our new land in Tyringham, which I will speak to how we acquired, and are just a few weeks away from finishing our home and beginning our settled life in Tyringham. So this is something that is a pretty emotional topic for me. It's really shaped my life and my life with my family. So I can actually say that there are a number of people that are in this room that have played various roles, and some of them really instrumental to bringing my family and I to where we are today. And I can't express enough how moving it is to be in front of all of you and being a part of this. Kathy actually was someone that I met when I was studying at UMass Amherst. I had designed a major in sustainable agriculture in the late 90s, and Kathy and I crossed paths through the Northeast Small Farm Institute, and she was one of the people that began this little fire inside me and spurred this passion and determination to someday be able to have my own farm. As it turns out, we ended up crossing paths in a very direct way years later, and I'll tell you about that. So my husband Pete and I moved to the Berkshires in 2001 with the intent to farm. We both had full-time jobs, and we were farming on the side. And we, at that time, didn't know if we would ever be able to be full-time farmers, but we couldn't live life without farming. So we were just figuring out a way to make it work. And in about 2003, we began working with various realtors in Berkshire County, primarily in central and southern Berkshire County, and began a really dismal task of trying to find a piece of land that was not only affordable, but farmable. And it was very discouraging for a number of years, and at that time we started a family, and our intent to be able to secure this for our family grew, and our confusion around how to do this grew. And it was somewhere towards the end of our realtor relationships that we came across a woman named Marguerite DeSantis, who's not here today, but she was so committed to helping us find land and believing in what we wanted to do with this land. And she ultimately connected us with Tim Geller, who is standing in the back today. He's part of the Community Development Corporation. And many years ago, about 10 years ago actually, we sat in a room with Tim and decided that the way to go about this was not going through realtors, and that we needed to get our message out about what we were looking to do to the community. So Tim helped devise a list of over 25 different contacts in Berkshire County. A significant amount of them were land trust members or presidents or just the organizations in itself. And Tim and Marguerite helped us craft a letter of what our intent was. And our intent was not just to farm and to be able to provide vegetables to our community, but we also really felt strongly about land stewardship. And we felt like it was an essential part of our values to be able to conserve land, preserve the knowledge of conserving land, and also to be able to offer this as an educational space to people. So this letter went out, and I actually, within a short amount of time, we received a number of well wishes and acknowledgments of what we were seeking to do. I still have a lot of those letters. Some of those people that are here today wrote some of those letters to me saying, if there's any way that we can help you we will, and we commend you for the work that you're seeking to do. And so, I held on to those letters, and we waited patiently. And about a year after we had sent out this letter, which was a hard copy. It wasn't an email. It was a letter that went out. I think what happened was that letter was posted somewhere in the town of Tyringham. And there are two people here today that actually came across that letter. And they're Maggie Howard and Sydney Urquhart. They're in the audience today. And we received a phone call and an interest to have a conversation. And so at that time we had been farming in Lee for a number of years. We wanted to share with them what we were doing on the land, and we brought them to our space. And the conversation began with the initial desire for land to be leased to us. And we quickly realized that similar to what Bridget was speaking to, in order for us to be farming, and to be farming wholeheartedly, and with the commitment that we need to, it wouldn't work for us to be farming on land that we were commuting to. And so we began the conversation of the possibility of building a home and selling a small piece of the land to us so that we could build a home on it and continue to farm from there. So, initially when these conversations began with the Howards, there was, some of the issues that came up was the cost of the land, and it was something that it took us a little while, but thanks actually to the Howards and the Urquharts, who really sought us out and continue to seek us out. They encouraged us to have very deep conversations about how we can make this work. And if it wasn't the dollars that we could hand out, what is it that we could hand out? And so over a course of 3 years, we devised a plan through the help of Kathy. Again, Kathy came back into our life, and we created a land sale agreement for approximately 5 acres of land, then a land lease agreement to adjacent land that we were purchasing, and then an overall land stewardship agreement with the greater intent of the extensive acreage around us. So that took, it took a few years for us to come to that place of understanding, and we are really right now at the brink of taking advantage and exploring those opportunities within it. So we don't have some of the years behind us, but we're really excited to be stepping into this. As I said, we're just about to finish building our house, and we've been farming on the land in Tyringham for 2 years. And I can actually remember when my husband and I years ago sat there and we were starting to come up with ideas of what our home was going to look like. I was coming up with ideas of what our home was going to look like, and my husband was devising plans of what the fields were going to look like. and I thought, how could we possibly farm on land before we actually were living there? We have to have a home. We have 2 small children. And he said, well, we need food to live, so I'm going to focus on this, and you can focus on that. And sure enough, as it worked out, it took us, after we purchased the land, it took us almost a year to secure a loan to be able to have a construction loan. And that was shocking to us and really traumatic in many ways, because we had already spent 3 years with this phenomenal family, creating all of our dreams and visions into something solid and secure, and then we came up against all sorts of bureaucracy in the bank world, and it took us a lot to prove that we as farmers were worthy of being able to build and grow. And so because of that awareness, actually, the part of our land lease agreement and our land stewardship agreement gave us the opportunity to defer some of our initial responsibilities financially as well as physically. So we would have the opportunity to be able to build our home and settle in a little bit. So we're right at the brink of that right now. We're about to move into our home and work more on the finer details of land stewardship. The land stewardship piece is, so when I spoke to the fact that we were coming up to some financial walls with land purchase, the land stewardship agreement that we came to with this family was to actually barter for some of the cost of the land. And so we, with the intent of having land conservation, farm preservation, community education being on our farm, we also had a skill set that we could offer to the greater property. And so we worked and came up with a whole scope of work that over a course of 10 years, we are responsible for essentially paying back through our work. And then after that time, there is the potential for us to be able to then subsequently get paid for work on the premises. And so that was a tremendous gift for us, and really the only way that we could have made this work. And so to be able to sit with a family that was just so willing to have these conversations was life-changing. It is life-changing for us, and it's the reason why we are here today. And so, one of the things that I would encourage anyone who is a landowner here and anyone that is a farmer is just to be willing to have those conversations. And sometimes they're totally awkward, and they're difficult, and they're vulnerable, and it's sometimes hard to say what works and doesn't work and what you need, but just be willing and open to the possibilities, because there's just amazing ways to be able to make this type of kinship work with people. And I really feel like we are an example of that. And I can't thank Maggie and Sydney enough. Please raise your hands. Everybody should know who you are, please. Please. They're really, I can't thank them enough. So here we are. And we have some, concrete information. Actually, Bridget was somebody that I had turned 2 years ago asking for an example of their lease model. And so that was, what you were speaking to, as we really need to have some of these resources available for landowners and farmers. I think that is key, because us being able to have these conversations, to be able to say what was challenging or necessary for us, is really important. So thank you.
Well, I'm Bruce Howden. I own Howden Farm in Sheffield, Massachusetts. And on April 10th of this year, Howden Farm was 75 years old. My story starts with maybe the traditional way of transferring the farm in the family, and it's going to end up with it needs to be transferred from me and out of the family at the end. So I will experience both methods of transferring this farm. I acquired it because I was one of two sons that inherited it. I had to buy my brother out, and my brother wasn't very easy to deal with. When Kathy talks about in-laws being, what did you call them?
I call them a lot of things.
I think you should change that to outlaws. In-laws sometimes turn out to be outlaws, let me tell you. The Sheffield Land Trust helped with our transition, and so did Pioneer Farm Credit. Pioneer Farm Credit was Credit Farm East? Farm Credit East now. Helped us. We had an evaluation done with them so that we didn't pay too much for the farm, and we figured they told us that this is the amount that you can spend on it, and anything more than that, it's not worth it. Well, my brother didn't believe that, of course. But anyway, we paid full market value for the farm. And that was a lot of money, and we still have a mortgage, believe it or not. But I only had to buy half of it. But it was very difficult, and it took 9.5 years. Some of the things that happened during that time was that the Sheffield Land Trust walked us through an APR on the property, which gave us some money. And we could pay the mortgage off at this point, but I don't do that. I used some of that money for putting up 2 new barns. And on those barns, I put up solar collectors to make electricity for both of those barns. And there's an excess that goes to the house. So we have used the programs, APR and the solar programs, and my hand is shaking. You want to hold it? So the APR. So my relationship with this farm is that I love this farm. It's a beautiful place. If anybody knows Sheffield, if you drive down Ranapo Road to go to Bartholomew's Cobble, our farm is the first one on the left. You go across the railroad tracks, and it's open fields, and it's absolutely beautiful. And you couldn't help but fall in love with it. One of the reasons for me to return to the farm after being away for 30 years, which I call the 30-year gap, was that my father developed 2 varieties of pumpkins on that farm, and that was his legacy to us and maybe to others as well. And we've developed a 3rd variety, and the first variety, which is called the Howden pumpkin, had a plant variety protection on it for 17 years, which is now gone past. And so if you buy Howden pumpkins someplace, they're they're open, and so they don't come from us or some seed that's protected. So, and then the Howden Biggie, which is still protected until 2016. And I have one called the Howden Triple X, which is not protected. And it really is, I have trouble every year with some kind of a problem, so we haven't really launched it yet. But that's the reason to go to the farm, was because of this pumpkin legacy. Let's see. That was the reason to move there.
That's great.
Challenges around land access. I rent a little bit of land to another farmer, and then I have a neighbor who lets me use some of their land, so I am not only do I use the neighbor's land for my farm, and I lease some. The neighbors are so good to me. They do not charge me a cent, no rent, and they let me use it as if it was my own land. I ask them a question, they said, do what you want. So they're great. The observation and experiences, I think that putting people together with land is very difficult. It's emotional because you have this family that's had this farm for 75 years, and the story was told earlier about the father and the son, and the father still didn't think the son was worthy of running the farm, and he's 76 years old. I would say, what about the great-grandson or something like that? So it's a very emotional thing. We have health problems. I do not belong to the group. There's 2 groups of farmers, those that are under 39. I don't belong in that group. And so when we hire somebody who we think that might be really interested in working on this farm and maybe becoming the manager of it, and maybe even moving into the position of owning it. It hasn't happened. I've been there 16 years. They just don't have the commitment to it. And I don't know how to make that happen. Housing is a problem. We have 2 farms that are, it's really 3 farms, or parts of 3 farms, but it's 2 farms put together. So it has 2 big farmhouses, and we've put a lot of money into them, so they're not inexpensive houses in Sheffield. And that's a drawback. However, when we got the APR on the farm, we divided the farm into 6 parcels. And I think it was the first time that they had divided the large parcels up into smaller parcels. But my idea was that the future of agriculture was smaller, organic farms, and that if we were going to get people to come and farm on the land or buy some of it, they couldn't buy the whole, it's 250 acres. They couldn't buy the 250 acres. So we divided it in six parcels. 2 parcels have the farmhouses and the farm buildings on them. One has 4 acres and the other has 5 acres. Now the one that has 5 acres actually has a building lot with it, but we would hope never to put a house up there, but maybe a nursing home for me or something like that. So this farm, there's no hard meetings around the kitchen table talking to relatives about where this farm is going to go. If you watch me cross the street out here and I'm killed today, the trustees of the reservations get it. But that's not my first choice. Who's here from the trustees of the reservations? That's not my first choice, sorry. I would like to see some young farmer or some farmer that would really appreciate it. This farm has been in my family for 75 years. My father he bought it, and he had to borrow some money from a neighbor in the research about the farm. I think he borrowed $1,900 from another family in the town of Sheffield. He had some money, and he paid that money back, and it was very interesting for me to read that part of the history of the farm. But as you all know, farmland has become more and more expensive, and since we have put it in an APR, we have taken some of the value out of it to help with the transition, and also to help with putting up 2 barns, so that with some of the equipment in there, we could use the 3rd one, by the way. And the solar collectors on the 2 barns, and I would still like to do more solar. So now we're facing not the kitchen table anymore, but the marrying of somebody who I think would be passionate about this farm. Thank you.